Ceremony. This ceremony was started in the 1920s by Norbert Capek, who was, well, by birth a Bohemian. When he was born, his homeland was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's what we would now call Czech. It used to be Czechoslovakia. They changed the name so much. Capek was a Unitarian minister. He was born in 1870. His mother was Roman Catholic. His dad was an agnostic. And he was raised in the Catholic Church, but when he got older, he didn't like that hierarchical structure. And so he wanted a free church, and the best known free church, even though it was very small in those days in Czechoslovakia, was the Baptist Church. And he became a Baptist. He liked that congregational feel and actually became a minister in the free faith in Czechoslovakia. Eventually, he traveled to the United States in 1914 and became the minister of a Baptist church in New Jersey. After a while, he just got to be uncomfortable with being a Baptist. And he slowly left the church and started eventually going to a Unitarian church. It is worth noting that the reason he went to the Unitarian church with his wife was because their kids were already there. They liked RE. They thought the children's program was good, and so they went to be with the children for a good RE program. Good RE is important. He returned to Czechoslovakia when it was Czechoslovakia. After the war was over, his country was a new country. So he went back home and started a new church in a new country. Talk about new. Everything was new. There was no old Unitarian church. There was no old Czechoslovakia. He was there, and it was distinctive, and it was different. And what he wanted was a ritual that would symbolize that would be different from the Christian rituals. So he didn't want to do communion or some version of communion. He wanted something else that would celebrate the free church and its ecclesiology. I throw at least one fancy word in every sermon. Ecclesiology is just doctrine of the church. What you mean by the church, what that doctrine is. And it was different, being a bottom-up democratic church. He wanted something that would celebrate that would show that it was free and voluntary. Now, when I say free, I don't mean that we just don't charge cover. I used to get that from my Methodist friends when I was in divinity school. I kept talking about the free church, and one of them actually said to me, "What do you keep going on about the free church for? We don't charge a cover." Well, that's not what we mean. We're not a hierarchical church. We're a free church. The Spirit comes from the bottom up, not the top down. And it's all voluntary. Nobody's here because they have to. And we're congregational. This congregation next week will make the decisions of this congregation for the year. You know, we voluntarily contribute money, make pledges, and that's what the budget comes from, what we agree to give. There's no group in Boston sending us money. They do a lot of stuff for us up there. That's why we send them money. But it comes from us. You know, we are the congregation. They are not the authority. We are. And then in an annual meeting, everybody who has signed the book is a member of the church gets to vote on what we shall be. So this is what he wanted to celebrate. And it's funny because what he came up with, a lot of people thought was an old tradition. This gets into a little Czech history. I'm going to digress for just a minute, but I'll come back. 500 years before Capek, there was a guy in Czechoslovakia, another Bohemian, named Jan Hus. We're talking 1415 here. Jan Hus was a Catholic priest. And what he wanted to do, this is 100 years before the Reformation, was to democratize the church and make it more free. And he sought to do that through the way communion was handled. Because the communion in those days, as most of you know, there are two elements to the communion. There's the bread and the wine. But when you went up to take communion in the only church that was there in those days, the people got the bread. The ordained clergy got bread and wine. So what Jan Hus did was take the cup to the people. I do have a problem. There's a reason, that doesn't look like something you would drink out of, but there's a reason about the chalice and why it was important. Because when we were looking for a symbol that people from Eastern Europe would recognize as a symbol of religious freedom, the artist chose the chalice because what Jan Hus had done 500 years ago was to give the chalice to the people. They had it too. It wasn't just the priests. So, 500 years later, when an East European saw a chalice with a flame coming out of it, they knew that that meant a beacon of religious freedom. But Jan Hus was the past. Capek liked that idea, but he didn't want to do communion. He was going to do something else. Well, he thought and thought. And finally the light bulb went off over his head. And he came up with the idea of a flower celebration, a flower service, a flower ceremony. Because he thought how every flower is unique and beautiful, just like everyone in the church is unique and beautiful. And so he thought this would be great. So what we'll do is we'll have everyone bring a flower, one flower just like their one self. And when they would come in, the way he did it into his church, they would come in, they had a big urn at the front. And you would come in and you would drop your flower in the urn when you enter, that voluntary, individual contribution. And the urn was symbolic then, of course, of the entire congregation. And then at the end of the service, each person would come up and take a flower, not their own, but somebody else's flower. So it was this bringing all those unique individuals together into that one congregation and then taking out. A fairly simple, and we'll do that in a minute. Now he usually did this at the end of the church year. This is something that was done long ago, far away, certainly before I ever got into ministry. But once upon a time, Unitarians, both here and in Czechoslovakia, took the summer off. It was too hot. Also, I know that ministers in those days did 2 or 3 sermons per Sunday, and they were all different, and they were all about an hour long. They needed some study time. So, and I think also it was just too hot in Boston to go to church, so people just went to the lake and stayed there all summer. So at the end of the church year, which in Czechoslovakia, Prague, was about the first weekend in June, that's when he would have the ceremony, because he thought it was, perfectly fitting then. For one thing, in Prague, flowers are in bloom in June. And the other was that this was the last church meeting for a couple of months. And so, theoretically, you had that flower representing somebody and the church both that you would take home with you and keep with you until you met again. And that's part of what we're going to do today. I mean, you might even look around at you now. Look around at the people who are sitting near you. How unique and different they are. No two the same. Even if they're twins. They're really, really different. And they're all absolutely beautiful. Every one of them. Capek's theology has been described as a sun-drenched theology. He was happy, he was hopeful, he was optimistic. His great values included, progress and education and the fact that change was going on all the time. He really pioneered a lot of religious education. And that sun-drenched theology sustained him in really hard times. Really hard times. To start with, his country was changing. It was brand new. And when he had been there less than 20 years, it was invaded. And parts of it were being carved away. The Depression hit Czechoslovakia earlier and more severe than it did here. The Great Depression, as opposed to the Great Recession. He had to deal with real fascism. We talk about fascism all the time. Oh, that bunch of fascists. These were real fascists that he dealt with. Not just some narrow-minded person. There really was a Nazi takeover, where the Nazis marched in and they were the law. They ruled. It was oppression like we cannot imagine. It was a capital offense to listen to radio other than state radio. Capital offense. That means they'll kill you for it. You could be killed for listening to the BBC. And on March 28, 1941, the police came to his house and arrested him and his youngest daughter, Zora, who was 29 years old, charged with listening to non-approved radio broadcasts and talking about them. They were hauled off. She was tried and convicted and sent to a work camp. Norbert Capek was charged with treason, and his sermons were used as evidence against him. That always gives me pause when I think about that. Could my sermons be used as evidence against me of being a Unitarian Universalist? Could I be convicted on Unitarian Universalism charges by my sermons, by our thoughts, by our deeds? Could we be convicted? Well, he was. But he appealed the conviction, and it was overturned. He won the appeal. The Gestapo didn't care. They seized him anyway and took him to Dachau. And in October of 1942, he was put on an invalid transport from Dachau to Linz, where he was put into the gas chamber and killed. He's a martyr. He died because he was a Unitarian minister and listened to the radio. It's said that even right before he was killed, he still possessed equanimity and calmness and dealt compassionately with those around him. And they looked to him as a source of strength. It sustained him in really hard times. Now, we have our hard times, and they're real. Our hard times are very real to us, and they touch us and they hurt us. We have serious health issues. We have serious economic issues. Sometimes we don't tell people about them. There are some of us feel despair about our future or the future of our country. We have that. It's real. And I recognize that. But our troubles pale in comparison to what Capek had to stand up against. This is a man who gave everything for his church. Everything. Even unto his life. This isn't some ancient tale. It's 1942. When we do the ceremony, I want you to do two things. One thing I want you to do is to watch carefully as the people come in here. Look at how beautiful they are. Look at how unique they are, and revel in that. Be proud of that and enjoy that. But the other thing I want you to do is to reflect and remember those who have sacrificed, literally, for us to be here. And be grateful for the privilege we are given, because they are great privileges. You might even think, WWYD, WWID, what would I do? What would I do in that place? What would I do for my church? What would I do for my people? It's a wonderful ritual. Enjoy it.